Hey everyone, it's Patrick Gray here, and it's been a long time coming, but it's time to have a chat about metadata. Now, if you're not Australian, you're probably going to find this video extremely boring. Sorry. So as you're probably aware, the Australian government is proposing new legislation that would force internet service providers to retain customer metadata for 2 years. Not sure what metadata is? I'll let Australian Attorney General George Brandis explain.
Retain this data for it retained or
I never get sick of seeing that. Can we have it one more time, please?
so is the web address that is part of the metadata.
Yeah, wow, I wonder why they're polling badly. Now, actually the intent of the legislation is reasonably sensible. The idea is telcos and ISPs will have to keep logs of who had which IP when. And that means it'll be possible for authorities to tie IP addresses to individual subscribers for up to 2 years. Web browsing data is explicitly ruled out. That's considered content. So you know what? I'm actually okay with that part of it. The same thing goes for phone call records. Who called who when. A lot of telcos just don't need to keep those records anymore because we're living in an age of capped mobile plans. As they're turning this logging off, a vitally important investigative tool is going the way of the dodo. And you know what? I reckon that's actually a pretty bad thing. It's my belief that telcos should be under an obligation to store certain types of metadata, and that data should be available to law enforcement bodies when investigating crimes. I believe that. And I like to think that some very diligent chaps and chapettes at various security agencies are currently scouring the metadata of this man, the Martin Place siege gunman, who shall not be named, for he is was an attention-seeking knob, and it would make him happy. But I want to know who that guy was talking to, even if I think he was basically just a nut job out for attention. But you know what? I think the government has made a grave error in linking this legislation to the national security discourse. Metadata is more useful when dealing with normal crime. ISP metadata was able to track an email sent by would-be collar bomb extortionist Paul Peters to an internet cafe. You remember this guy? He strapped a collar bomb onto some teenage girl and left a note demanding money or he'd detonate the bomb. Turned out to be a fake, but yeah, he got caught because he used an internet cafe and they were able to trace him through metadata. He was quickly identified through CCTV in the surrounding area and he's in jail now, and that's a good thing. And hey, what about victims of harassment? I want victims of domestic violence to be able to prove where certain communications came from or who they came from so they can prove court order breaches and establish patterns of harassment. I want victims of eBay fraud to at least have some kind of shot at recourse if the scammer was local, which sometimes they are. And I want all of these things. Now, you're probably thinking that I'm being terribly pro-security state here, but I kind of like having a police force that can do its job. Critics often ask the government to prove how metadata is used to solve these crimes, but the fact is they've always had access to the data. It's actually an integral part of the investigative process. It's only now that it's starting to dry up, and that's why they want mandated retention. But the fact is they just don't know how much deleted metadata will affect them. But, and this is a big but, I think the current bill that the government wants to introduce is actually pretty awful, and there's a simple reason behind that. The access regime, the access to this data is just free. It's a free-for-all. We've got state and Commonwealth agencies accessing metadata without a warrant up to 300,000 times a year. And you know who the biggest subscriber to metadata is? The Australian Government Welfare Agency, Centrelink. All they have to do is put in a request on a pretty letterhead, fire it off, and there's your metadata, Mr. Dolan Pension Police Nazi guy. Just go right ahead. I'm going to resist the temptation to digress into a huge rant about how Centrelink's use of this information represents an abhorrent attack on the privacy of the people least able to protect themselves from those types of abuses. And I'm going to try to keep it relevant. 300,000 is too many requests, and there are some real questions about why some of the agencies should be allowed continued access to things like telephone call logs. I mean, the Victorian Taxi Commission gets access, for God's sakes, as do local government agencies, that's councils, and there are basically zero checks or balances. So say what you want about retention. I don't mind if Telstra keeps a record of which IP my house had for, 2 years. I think the retention debate is such a massive distraction from the real issue here, which is access. The way the government has set up this bill is completely nuts. The government wants to set up a list of the types of metadata that the government can demand telcos keep. And initially that list, of course, looks sensible, but who knows what they're going to add to it later. And they want the power to add new metadata sets to the list through regulation. So with a swipe of the pen, who knows what will wind up on the list of data that needs to be kept. The bill is deeply, deeply flawed, and it does nothing to correct the access regime nightmare. Now, Western Australian federal senator and hair model Scott Ludlam, my homie, is doing his best to kill the bill. but he's spending an awful lot of time arguing that there should be no mandated data retention at all. He seems to imply that its use in investigations is eroded somewhat by the myriad anonymity options available to internet users these days. And sure, maybe that's the case a little bit, but he's trying to torpedo the whole bill by attacking the fundamental premise that metadata retention is actually a good thing. He's also spending an awful lot of time suggesting access to metadata should only be granted by warrant. Ask any copper, half the time it's a positive result of some metadata sifting that's used to actually get an interception warrant for content. You get a suspect, you look at who they've been talking to, you turn up more suspects. It's just how investigations work. Now that does mean the police are often pulling the subscriber details and call logs of innocent people. That's what they use to rule them out. But you can't actually get a warrant to rule someone out. That's not how they work. In the case of a phone tap warrant, you need to show a magistrate that you have very good reason to suspect someone for a specific crime that carries heavy penalties. You also have to demonstrate exhaustion, that you'll only be able to get a conviction if the warrant is granted and the evidence is collected that way. Applying that burden to a cop is trying to figure out if some asshole ex-husband has been harassing his ex-wife from a blocked number. You're just not going to be able to do that. It's an investigative tool that's actually incompatible with the warrant process as it currently stands. And that's what's actually good about metadata to usual investigations. I mean, it is used for serious crimes and national security, but it's also used to solve the little crimes. Say you introduce a warrant requirement and you cut down the number of requests by half by removing the sillier requests and fine-tuning around the edges. You're still looking at 150,000 warrant applications a year. Court system's going to love you for that. Not to mention all the detectives who have to prepare their applications with counsel. They love paperwork. They really do. So you can't really introduce a warrant system for this stuff, but a lot of it should be retained for good reasons. There's a social benefit there. So how do we fix the access problem? I really don't know. Maybe we could introduce some auditing guidelines and penalties for abuse, actually have an independent body with teeth that audits various agencies and units to make sure they're not going too metadata crazy. But government regulating government, it doesn't tend to work out that way. So I really don't know. I just don't. Meanwhile, the current bill is a mess. It's vague, does nothing to address the access issue, and is way too flexible when it comes to the type of data that should be stored. And you ever notice how when people say flexibility, it usually means someone's getting f***ed over? Yeah, funny that. So hey, even though I completely disagree with his premise, I'm glad our homie S. Luds is out there trying to torpedo this bill, and hopefully he makes it difficult enough for them so they come back with a draft that includes some better oversight. Like maybe some quasi-judicial oversight and decent public reporting which correlates the types of offences in which metadata is sought and by which agency. I mean, that would be a great start. But either way, the current bill is a turkey, and let's hope S. Luds and his amazing hair managed to kill it off. Now look, this whole thing is very complicated. These are just some of my ideas. Do tell me yours. I don't know the solution. Maybe you do. Jump into the comments down below or find me on Twitter. I'm just Risky Business, one word. And don't forget to check out the Risky Business podcast every week at risky.biz for your fill of InfoSec news and analysis. Until next time, I've been Patrick Gray. Thanks for watching.